Hi, I'm Dan Danford. This is another episode of Money Made Easy for dadsdivorce.com. We often take questions that have been posed to us from viewers at the website, and this week is no exception. I came across an article on the 5 fundamentals of financial success. What do you think are the keys to financial success? You know, of course, there are hundreds of articles and hundreds of books out there on the subject of finance and investing. And I'm going to keep it really simple. Sometimes you'll see long lists and this kind of thing, and all of them have good information, so I'm not going to take anything away from that. But I guess what I would say is the number one thing that makes a huge difference in terms of financial success is deliberation. Okay? I just can't tell you how much impulse hurts our abilities to succeed financially. So I'm just going to narrow it down to one, and then we're going to break it into a couple of smaller categories. But what I really suggest to you is that anytime you get ready to make some kind of financial decision, that you should deliberate on that decision, okay? And most of those deliberations fall into one of 3 areas. Okay, the first area is to spend wisely. Okay, now part of that means making wise buying decisions. In other words, if you're going to buy something, part of it is where can I buy that most economically, or what's the most value that I can get in making that purchase. And that's really, really important, and so that's part of it. But the other part of it is understanding the difference between things you need and things you want. Okay? And usually, if you're like most Americans and you're like me and my family, there's a gap between what you need and what you want. Now, I don't have any big problem with you buying things that you want, okay, as long as you can afford them, okay, and as long as you make deliberate decisions in doing so. What I don't like to see is the big impulse buy. I don't want you ever to head home to your significant other thinking, I'm afraid to tell them what I've done. Okay, if that ever happens to you, then you probably didn't deliberate over that decision enough. So that's the first one I'm going to say, is spend wisely. The second one, and I think this one maybe seems kind of fundamental, but I see people who mess it up a lot, and that's to borrow wisely. I mean, in general, it makes a lot of sense to borrow money for big ticket items if they will either appreciate in value over time or they will retain their value over time. So, I mean, when you think about it, what are the 2 big things there? Houses and cars. Okay? So all of us need transportation to get back and forth to work. Cars tend to at least retain some of their value over time. So if you borrow money to buy a car, typically you'll pay off that car at some point and the car will still have some value. So that's a good thing. That was a good way to use borrowing. Homes are the same way, except homes tend to appreciate in value over time. So borrowing money to buy a home makes a lot of sense. Almost everything else doesn't. Okay? Borrowing for consumer goods, borrowing on credit cards, almost all of those kinds of purchases are a very expensive way to acquire something, and it's probably not the smartest financial move. Okay, and then the third area I'll talk about in terms of deliberation is what I call invest wisely. Okay? It's really easy to get caught up in kind of the frenzy. Okay? Well, I call them screeching monkeys on TV. They're just telling you all the time to do this, do this, do this, or this is the best deal that ever came down the pike, or whatever it is. And I would suggest that you ignore most of that. Instead, I think you ought to come up with some kind of general plan for your age and circumstance and what you need the money for, and then make deliberate long-term investments, okay? And really kind of ignore that market noise that goes on all the time. So those are the 3 things that I would say. The big one is, the overall umbrella is to use deliberation in making financial decisions. And then I say spend wisely, borrow wisely, and invest wisely. Just by way of closing, a couple of things that I say that may surprise you. One thing, these are some things I don't believe success is dependent on. One of them is income. I, honest to gosh, will work with a lot of people who have succeeded, financially. One thing I can tell you is that many of those people never earned a lot of money. Okay, the fact that they have money today is a testimony to those other three things. I see both ends of the spectrum. I see people who never made a lot of money who now have quite a bit of money. I also see people today who make a lot of money but have nothing to show for it because they don't do a very good job there. So financial success is not directly linked to how much income you have. And then the other thing I'd say is I don't believe that financial success is stopped because of misfortune. I mean, almost every family has some misfortune at some point in time. But most of the people who succeed financially have risen above that misfortune. So even if you do have a bump in the road, I mean, even if something happens to you, even if it's catastrophic, it is possible to pick up the pieces and move on. So I just think that, we tend to, or many of us tend to say, oh, well, I don't make very much money, so I'm never going to accomplish much. Well, it's just not true. Or we tend to say, hey, something bad happened to me 2 or 3 years ago, and I'm never going to recover from it. I don't think those are true either. I genuinely believe that most financial success comes from the behaviors we engage. Okay? If we're deliberate about those behaviors, if we make the right choices, then financial success will be ours. That's it for another episode of Money Made Easy. I'll see you next week.